What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the KJ52 podcast. Very special edition Story Time with KJ podcast. Story Time with KJ. Story Time with KJ. Story Time with KJ. It's time for Story Time. It's the official Story Time with KJ song. You're welcome. Anyway, here's a couple things I want to let you guys know. This is a clip from my audiobook, which is obviously taken right from my What Happened Was book, which is now currently out and available at kj52book.com. If you'd like to hear the entire story, there's two things you can do. You can either, one, purchase the audiobook at kj52book.com, or you can become a Patreon supporter at Patreon, patreon.com/KJ52. Either will allow you to hear the rest of this story. Otherwise, I'm very excited to let you know a little bit about myself. This story is called How I Got My Name, and kind of runs that down. And again, like I said, if you'd like to hear the whole entire thing, either become a patron at patreon.com/KJ52 or purchase my book, What Happened Was, at www.kj52book.com. Hope you guys are doing well. Got a lot going on with this podcast coming up. Very excited to drop it on y'all. God bless.
Chapter 1. How I Got My Name. My name has been a point of contention for me for most of my life. By the time I reached junior high, my insecurity about it reached an apex, mainly because people couldn't pronounce it correctly. People call me Joanna, Joshua, Johan, Johan. You get the point. When I became a Christian, kids would tease me and call me Jehovah. When you're a teenager, you just want to fit in. And if you have an odd first name, most kids have the option to fall back on their middle name. In my case, I didn't have this option because my middle name is Kirsten, which is a girl's name. Yeah. My full name is Jonah Kirsten Carlin Sorrentino, so I had zero options. I had a Hebrew name, Scottish name, Sicilian name, or a girl's name to pick from. It's just the worst possible scenario you can imagine when you hit a time where you really don't want to stand out. My whole entire life, I never met another person named Jonah. People would make references to the story in the Old Testament. And to be honest, that's the only Bible story I really ever knew because I didn't grow up in a church-based home. To give you some further context for this story, I should mention, my home wasn't very conventional. I called my parents by their first name probably up till about 10 years ago. I was raised to call them by their first names because my parents wanted us to be on equal footing. I didn't know any different. I grew up thinking everybody did that. I found out years later my mom almost named me Sky. Her side of the family was very much into boating, sailing, the like, stuff like that. My dad's side of the family is from Jersey. Both my parents were artistic people. They couldn't agree on a name for me, and so up to the moment when I was born, they hadn't landed on a name, and their idea was, well, we'll just name him later after we bring him home. So I was born. The doctor insisted that they had to name me. So apparently they asked the doctor just for a name he hadn't heard in a long time. I find it interesting they wanted to go with a name that was uncommon. To me, it seemed like from the moment I was brought into this world, the whole purpose was that I wouldn't be like anybody else. But when I just wanted to blend in when I was 12, it became a real problem. In hindsight, my name has defined everything about who I am. There's never been anything typical about who I am. Years later, I wear that like a badge of honor. I'm proud of the uniqueness of how I was raised. I'm proud of all the perspectives I've seen. But you can only appreciate these things in hindsight. You never have that kind of perspective when you're trying to walk it through in the moment. So the doctor said Jonah was a name he hadn't heard in a long time. For some reason, it clicked for my parents. Again, there wasn't any religious reference in their mind, and as my dad explains it, years later, they were driving through Amish country. They stopped somewhere, and I was in the backseat crying. Then an Amish couple actually stopped them and said, "Hey, what's the baby's name?" They said Jonah. And the Amish couple said, "That boy will be a preacher someday. Listen to those lungs." That story kind of blows my mind. Another cool fact, my dad actually told me that he recorded my first sound, meaning when I was born, he was there with a tape recorder to capture the first things that came out of my mouth. So I look back on these things and I have to conclude I was meant to be unique and I was meant to be on the microphone. One more interesting element to my story is the fact, in a lot of ways, I ran from God. I ran from him for most of my adolescence. I ran from my calling, so to speak. just like the biblical Jonah, who also did something incredibly unique. Most prophets spoke to the Jews, and yet Jonah's calling was to go to the Gentiles and to call them to change. But he ran from his unique calling. And even the way God got his attention inside of his running was very unique. I can't help but draw some really interesting parallels and feel a kinship.